starting the webinar and starting the live streams. We're going to have people starting to jump in here. Hey, everybody, looks like there's some people starting to jump in. We're going to be chopping it up today on eAuctions. I am super excited about this topic, and we will see. We'll get started just momentarily. I'm just starting the live streams here, so give me a second to get that all going. All right, that should take a couple of seconds. Tina is always in the control room behind us here. I am with Heinrich from Scanmarket, and we can talk a little bit about him in 1 second. Hi, Heinrich. Thank you so much. I know it's about 7 o'clock at night where you are, so thanks so much for joining us in the evening. I'm just going to do a little bit of I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping, and then we'll get rocking and rolling. So if that's okay with everybody. Tina, are we live on LinkedIn?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, great. So as usual, people are coming in a little bit late. The room's going to fill up as we go. This is usually people that just don't want to hear my spiel. Once again, Mike Cadger from Procurement Foundry, super excited to bring you live webinar thought leadership content. Today we are with Heinrich from Scanmarket, and we are talking about eAuctions, a topic that's near and dear to my heart, considering I used to operate in an auction. And I'm really, really interested to hear where we are with this. What's the latest technology? How are people engaging in this? Are we at the tipping point on this? I have tons and tons of questions. I might be like a 5-year-old today. We're going to run through some slides on Heinrich's side as well. But let's get a couple things really quick. So first things first, if you're inside of the Zoom room, you can say hello to the chat window. Tell us where you're logging in from. I have a couple of questions around how much you know about eAuctions and whether or not you've actually worked with eAuctions before. So I'm going to ask a couple questions about that. Feel free to just throw that right out into the chat room as we go. And then also, if you are just following us on LinkedIn Live, Tina is monitoring LinkedIn Live, and if you have questions in the chat discussion in LinkedIn Live, you're obviously not in the Zoom room. Tina will bring those questions in for us here. Heinrich has agreed very graciously to take questions on demand as they come. I will do my best to keep an eye on your questions, primarily in the chat, but also if you want to put them in the Q&A, I keep an eye on both of those things. So feel free to throw your questions into the chat or throw it into the Q&A, and I will try my best to get everybody's questions answered today as we go. So big question for the audience right now. First off, why don't we do this? Heinrich, introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your position, tell us a little bit about Scanmarket. I got some slides I'm going to be switching back and forth on just so that we kind of get a sense of who you are. And also at the same time, everybody that's in the audience and in the attendance room, tell us, number one, how much you know about eAuctions on a scale of 1 to 5. I don't even know how to spell it, or hey, I've been deploying these things for years. And number 2, if you have been using it. Thomas Perkins just raised his hand, so I see you, Thomas. Thank you for raising your hand. If you have a question, you can take your hand down. If you have a question, you can just type it somewhere and I'll see it, brother, okay? There you go. Awesome. All right, Heinrich, off to you, my friend. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about the company and a little bit about and why we're here today.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you for the introduction. Hi to everybody. My name is Henrik Bolslev. I am CCO at Scanmarket. That just means that I'm one of the old guys. So I've been with Scanmarket for more than 17 years now, and been conducting eAuctions for more than 17 years. So thousands of eAuctions under my belt, both as an advisor running eAuctions on behalf of customers, and of course just following auctions from all of our different customers around the world. So super excited to be here. I am, as I said, CCO at Scanmarket, so I'm heading up our global sales on the Scanmarket product line within Unit 4, which is our parent company. And then I'm also involved, of course, in supporting our customer success programs, etc. But that was just a little bit about me. And if we just quickly touch base upon Scanmarket, so we were founded in 1999, so pretty much, or basically since eAuction originated. And as said, I've been with the organization since 2006. As I said before, we're owned by the ERP provider Unit 4. We were acquired last year, so a big part of their group and doing their source to contract offering. I'm located in Denmark, so a little bit ahead of you guys time zone wise. And if we look at, the Scanmarket organization, we're about 105 employees focusing on the source to contract space, and then where half of them are in the software development area. And if you just go to the next slide, just to give you a little bit of, overview of what types of organizations and companies we're working together with. So globally, about more than 500 different types of companies and organizations are using our source to contract system, where eAuctions are one of them, and which will be the topic of our discussion today. So here we'll just get a little overview of the types of customers and companies that are utilizing our system. I think we had users last year in 86 different countries and total logins from everybody. So stakeholders, suppliers, users, etc., from 171 different companies. So very much a globally used system. And this is also what we're going to talk into today in terms of auctions. What are we seeing globally and so forth. And we are issuing quarterly statistics and yearly statistics on this that you can all access from our website. And if you just quickly go to the next slide, and then we'll stop with the different slides, but just really, what we are able to help with is really with companies or organizations that have these as some of their objectives, or you can say pain points that they would like to you can say improve on or make more efficient. Then of course we have our source to contract suite that can deliver on that and help on that, whether it's driving down supplier costs, whether it's getting spend under management, or supplier compliance or onboarding and so forth. So a lot of different ways that we can work, that we are working together with all of our global clients on the upstream procurement function and in regards to source to contract. But enough with these boring slides. Let's just get back to the topic of today, which is of course eAuctions. And I'm sure that there's a lot of questions. I know, Mike, you have been telling me of how many questions you have. So looking forward to hearing those and have a great discussion around eAuctions.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I'm going to go back to slide 3 for a second. I'm already going off script, so I apologize for this. But what strikes me about this is, I got to be honest with you, I didn't realize that it was this applicable to this many different categories of enterprise, right? I mean, okay, listen, public sector, that makes a whole bunch of sense to me, right? That, the public sector would be using auctioning as a government guidelines and principles and things like that. But for me, and I know we're going to cover this a little bit later on, because I have an actual question around this, around other demographics associated with where eAuctions work better. But it's a little bit shocking to me to see that there's this many different categories of companies that are using auctioning with you right now. And they're using it successfully. Like I never in a million years would have thought that life sciences and healthcare would be doing auction. So to me, it's kind of refreshing and exciting to see that it's taking a foothold.
Yeah, I just want to quickly say that remember, we cover a lot more functionalities than just auctions. So the companies that you saw there doesn't necessarily only use auctions or are using auctions. It's using a combination of, but auctions are used across all of our client or all of our customer bases and all the different verticals. And I'm pretty sure we will talk into that a little bit later today. But cool. We strongly believe that auctions can be used for every category. It's not so much a question about category or company. It's a question about that competitive situation that you find yourself in, and whether it would make sense for you to utilize an auction tool. But you can absolutely use that across everything.
And I want to make sure that I don't put this off to the side, because it says it in the title, harnessing the power of procurement, how to integrate automated negotiations. And that's really kind of the crux of it, right? So you're using an auction platform to create this automated negotiation strategy, right? And so I want to make sure that I keep reminding myself of automated negotiations, because as a procurement guy, the concept of automated negotiations is thrilling and scary as hell all at the same time to me, because it makes me think of, all right, I might be able to cover a lot more ground, but then I also might be like working myself out of a job at the same time. So before we jump into all that, let's talk a little bit about the history, because I know, we did this in the pre-read and it's fascinating to me. Talk to me a little bit about the history of auctions in corporate settings, Give us a little bit around the evolution of the method of this method of sourcing, meaning, hey, I'm not running an RFP, things like that. I'd love to hear a little bit about, whether or not you think we're at an inflection point or a tipping point associated with the utilization of auction as a strategy, things like that. So can you give us a little bit of background and kind of set the stage for us?
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. So, auctions originated and started to emerge in the mid 90s, and it basically grew out of the automotive industry where you saw the first auctions, and then it ventured into a couple of different verticals, primarily around retail that was picking up on this, and then it ventured down in down the supply chain. So you had food producing companies picking up on this as well, and then out further into the supply chain. And as I said, we were founded in 1999. So I think when we started auctions in 1999, there were a handful maybe of providers delivering auctions. The first really well-known global provider was Free Markets, which later was acquired by Ariba, which later came into SAP. So they were the front runners there, together with a couple of other companies that is no longer there.
Right.
So that was kind of the start of everything. And then if you look at the evolution, I think auctions has always, from day one, you had the reverse type auctions, which is also called an English reverse auction, which is the standard auction, which is the one that most will know. So just explain quickly. You invite suppliers into an auction. They are bidding against each other or reacting to each other's bids, and then the auction will continue until none of the suppliers are able to lower or to bid any further. So so the advantage is always that a supplier will have the possibility to react to a competitor's last bid, and then of course the auction will continue until they are no longer able to do so. So so the dynamics in an English reverse auction is driving from the bidding dynamics or bidding activity from the different suppliers, and that's where you get the synergy and the dynamics that is pressing down the price, and that was the, you can say, starting point of auctions. And then over the years, Dutch auctions, Japanese auctions have been added to that, together with a number of functionalities that you can switch on and off on auctions as well.
Right.
So that's kind of a little bit of the evolution, and maybe we should come back to the different types a little bit later as well, so I can explain a bit more about how those works.
Are there different areas around the world where auction as a strategy is more mainstream than others? I mean, the U.S. market, the European market, the Asian market. I know from my experience in the seafood industry, and very, very few people know this, and I think I kind of shocked you with it. Before I came to corporate world, I ran a fish auction, which was really cool. And it was the first electronic fish auction in the United States. But there has been a fish auction in Boston, Massachusetts for about 250 years, right? It's very simple. Boats come in, they need to sell their things. Some guy gets up on a box and we start yelling numbers at each other. There's a little fist fight or a scuffle somewhere. And and then everybody kind of settles down and we sell the fish for the day, right? But is there a place where the adoption of what I would call the modern auction platform, kind of like what you guys are offering, is there a place where this has become mainstream more than others? Is Europe ahead of the United States in adoption at this point, or is it kind of?
I would say there are definite differences in terms of verticals, in terms of industries. So there are some verticals and some industries where auctions are much more mainstream than others. So as I said, if you go into retail, food manufacturing companies, eAuctions are much more mainstream than if you go into service industries and stuff like that, as an example.
Right.
If you look at it from a geographical point of view, I think it's more a question of how you're then utilizing it. Because if you look at China, which is actually the biggest market for us in terms of number of auctions, and we have a huge e-auction community out there. They are running, hundreds of auctions every single day, but they're running it on very small volume. So they are basically e-auction everything. Whereas if you look at Europe and you look at the US, it is fewer auctions, but it's much larger volumes or much larger spend that is then going through. So we're just using it differently. And then I would also say that this is again a little bit back to the vertical, but also in Europe and in the US, it's used a bit more strategical in terms of how you are applying the different auction types and how you're applying the different functionalities to that specific situation that you're in. Whereas in China and in APAC, we more see a tendency to just stick to reverse auctions and just run with that. But we definitely see a much larger pickup of auctions and the utilization of that if we look at China or elsewhere in APAC.
Right. Yeah, and we get out of sequence a little bit because I had a question around whether or not there was some associated with automated negotiations capabilities in eAuctions, just not certain categories, and I think you kind of touched on that a little bit. Maybe we can come back to it again. Can we start with a little bit of just how the heck an auction, how it works, right? I mean, what are the steps in the process for conducting an auction and the automation process, so that we're clear on is deploying an eAuction in an enterprise? This is a question I have, and I thought about this as we were talking the other day. I'm wondering, wow, is auctioning the death of the RFP or not? And you know, I don't know where that goes, because I thought, okay, I mean, well, maybe it is, but at the same time, what are the steps associated with it? What are the prep, things like that?
So it's definitely not the death of RFPs because you need RFPs to qualify and pre-qualify your suppliers and understand that competitive situation that you're in. Of course, if you already know this, you have already identified 4 suppliers, you know they can deliver what you're looking for. Absolutely, you can go straight to an auction and then then really optimize that process. But if you're going to market where you don't know the suppliers and you are discovering suppliers and who can deliver what you're looking for, etc., you definitely need to run an RFI or an RFP first, and then understand the different suppliers who can deliver exactly what you're looking for, and also identify what are the differences between the suppliers, and that's one thing I really want to hammer in here. Auctions is not supposed to be on price alone. Auctions are supposed to be on total cost of ownership. And the way you identify total cost of ownership is, of course, to do an RFP or an RFI to understand all the differences between the suppliers. Are they all accepting the same payment terms, or are there variations there? Are there variations in their service level? Are there variations in the quality or something like that I will accept taken into my auction? And if I have accepted that, then I can also you can say evaluate, or I can put a weight on that value that these differences has, and I can incorporate that into the auction. So I'm making sure that I'm evaluating on total cost of ownership, meaning that the winning supplier also has the lowest price. So typically you would do your RFI, RFQ, identify the suppliers that can deliver what you're looking for, identify the differences between the suppliers. Then based upon that, you will evaluate what is the right negotiation strategy for me. And to be honest, that doesn't mean that will always be an e-auction. I think you should always look at each individual case and then determine what will bring me the best value for money. Is that a face-to-face negotiation, and what tactics should we apply? Or is it an e-auction negotiation, and what tactics should we apply there in terms of auction types and functionalities that can drive the best dynamics in our e-auction negotiation? So that's typically what you do. Then once you have decided on the strategy, you then communicate out to the suppliers how you're going to run the e-auction negotiation. What are the rules of the game? How are you going to run this? You do a thorough conditioning and training of the suppliers so they know exactly how this will work if they haven't participated in it before. And then you go through your e-auction negotiation, which typically lasts on an average 45 minutes in total, where the suppliers will then be competing against each other, and where, of course, you are also driving what is happening through a well-defined communication strategy that you have laid out with the suppliers as well. But that's typically the process, right? And then afterwards, the winner of the auction with the overall best price, that's where you submit your order. But remember, auction can also be used as a pre-qualification method. So you can use that to pre-qualify the most competitive suppliers, and then you can end that up with another auction or another face-to-face negotiation where you then settle other elements. So there's a number of ways of how you can potentially utilize that, right?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and we're gonna come back to it. I want to talk a little bit more about strategy, because you threw that at me when we first met, and I was thinking to myself, God, what's the strategy associated with an auction? You just fire the thing up and let it rip, right? And of course, just showing my ignorance to the whole thing, even though I operated an auction, I'm like, that's how we did it. It was like, all right, listen, we get this X amount of fish, we turn on the system, everybody comes in and they bid. And I don't know, I guess there wasn't a lot of strategy to it other than, hey, we want the most people we can bidding on the fish because we're looking to get the fish price up as opposed to the price down. But then again, there's the total cost of ownership of, and the way I can equate the total cost of ownership is some people were buying fish at one price, some people were buying fish at another price. The yield on those two pieces of fish might be completely different, and the total cost of ownership for what you're packaging and sending off the market is going to be completely different. And you might end up, if you don't buy the best fish at the best price, you might buy a lower quality grade, and then at the end of the day, you might only sell 80% of it. But you got to think of the total cost of, oh my God, I had to throw away 20%. Which then becomes a total cost of ownership calculation, right?
Yeah, but if you just come back to the strategy element, right? So really what I mean about that is that once you know the competitive environment that you're in, then you also have the knowledge, or at least you have the information to understand how should I then set up the auction in the best possible way from a strategical point of view to achieve what you're looking for. You actually brought up a slide just before.
I'm bringing it back up. Yep.
Because I think one of the important things with this slide here, there's a lot of information here, but if you look at the right bottom corner, what is the purpose of the auction, right? Because you know that is formulating your strategy as well as to what is it that you are looking for here. Is it just driving down the overall cost? Is it shortlisting your suppliers? Is it price compression? Is it cost avoidance? What is it that you're really looking for here? And that, of course, also plays into what is then the strategy. Then when it comes to actually looking at, so what is the strategy in terms of auction, choice of auction, choice of functionalities, then that comes down to the competitive level. So a simplified example, if I have 6 identified suppliers and there's a good competition in between the suppliers, meaning that the price from number 1 to number 2, 3, 4, and 5 is very low. So it's a very close competition. Then it's a straightforward reverse auction, because once my suppliers start bidding and my 4th supplier lowers his price by 2%, it brings him into the leading to the leading position. Then you have the other suppliers starting to react on that, and that's where you get the dynamics to bring down the price. But if you are in a not so great competitive environment where again you have 6 shortlisted suppliers or 6 identified suppliers, but there's a huge gap in between the suppliers pricing wise when you look at total cost of ownership, and let's say the leading supplier is 20% cheaper than the second best supplier, then if you run a standard reverse auction, you gain nothing, right? Because the other suppliers will have to lower their price by more than 20% before they are pressuring the leading supplier. And then you need to consider going into a Dutch auction, Japanese auction, or maybe even consider a face-to-face negotiation, right? So that's just very overall. Then also looking into the differences between the suppliers from the cheapest supplier to the second cheapest, third cheapest, etc. Then there's also a number of functionalities that you can decide whether you want to switch on and off. And again, a simplified example, if you want to show the rank information in a reverse auction, so whether they're number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., you would choose to do that if there's a lot of suppliers because you want to show that they're in a very high competitive situation. But if you have a low number of suppliers, you would typically blindfold this information and just show whether they're leading or not leading by traffic lights. In this way, they don't know how many other competitors they are up against, but they can just see whether they're leading or whether they are not leading. And if you have a low number of suppliers, you actually create a more competitive atmosphere here, because if you were showing to them that there were only 2 suppliers in there, they would quickly realize that I'm all the time number 1 or number 2. But by not showing this information, they would not have this knowledge, and then they would have the belief that there will be more suppliers in there. So there's a lot of tricks to the game that you can use there or utilize and look into.
That's interesting. I remember talking to somebody once about horse racing, right? Of all things. the gentleman knew significantly more about horse racing than I did, other than I know how to buy a ticket to win, place, or show, right? And he had been in the industry, and he said, what's really interesting is some of the best times ever recorded from horse racing races with only 3 or 4 horses in them, you know, or match races with 2 horses racing against each other, because it almost gets lost in there's 16 horses in the race. Like there's an optimum number of horses per race, or number of suppliers in an auction, right?
So
And I don't mean to make an analogy, but it seems fitting.
no, but this is actually a very interesting comment, because we have done a lot of statistical analysis on this, exactly this one here. What is the optimal number of suppliers, and what is the value for you to bring in another supplier into your e-auction negotiation?
Right.
And we did very extensive statistical analytics on this, and we could see that by adding in an additional supplier into your e-auction negotiation, you would save 1.11% more up until 7-8 suppliers. After
Right.
7-8 suppliers, there was no significant savings to be had by adding in additional suppliers. And this is I think that's really interesting information to have, right? Because that will give you as a buyer the understanding of what is the value of me going to market and source for additional suppliers, or potentially working with my specifications to widen that, so I have more suppliers that can actually deliver what I'm looking for. And statistically, we could see that is 1.11%.
I think that's really interesting, and I'd love to dive into the psychology behind that, of why it's 7 or 8. Like at what point does somebody in a sales organization go, you know what, at 8 or 9 or 10 or 12 suppliers, we get a 1 in 10 chance of winning this thing, so we're not even going to be competitive. Or like, I wonder what the psychology behind that is, you know?
I don't think it's so much a question about psychology. I think it's more that if you hit 7-8 suppliers, you have basically covered the different types of suppliers that is in the market there. So you both have the expensive and the non-expensive suppliers in there, and you have that mix of suppliers that will give you that overall best price. But at least, you know, there could be a lot of speculations on different things there, but at least that's what we could see from a statistical point of view.
So there's a question inside of the chat. I don't know if you got a chance to look at it or not, but Zoe asked a question: how do you react to the common pushback that auctions kill supplier relationships? There's been a chat going on amongst that, but I'd love to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah, so I definitely, I think it only kills supplier relationship if you do it wrong. Yep. So you know, you should, you know, an e-auction is not meant for you to stop communicating with your suppliers. Rather, on the contrary, you should be communicating very much with the suppliers in the pre-qualification and in the lead up to the auction, in regards to conditioning them, preparing them for the auction, ensuring them that you have taken in all different things into consideration. So you are running the auction based upon total cost of ownership, etc., etc., etc. So it's only the negotiation itself that you are automating and that you are running through an e-auction. And even under an e-auction, you should also be communicating with the suppliers, and you should have a well-defined communication strategy going into the auction. So the ones that just send this blindly out to suppliers, not communicating it properly, not conditioning properly, and not preparing the suppliers properly, they will also fail, and they will not get the right results out of this either. So in my opinion, it definitely doesn't kill the supplier relationship. It's actually something that will ensure that you are forced to actually communicate properly with them, because if you haven't done that, you're going to fail on what you're doing.
All right. Wow. Questions are starting to come in.
I hope that made sense for whoever asked this question.
I think it does. I think it does. And I think it's a little bit is taking place. A little bit of what you covered is also taking place in the chat as well. But I think it comes down to, I would dovetail off of that, and I would say, listen, if the auction strategy of what you're doing eliminates or creates friction between you and a supplier, I would ask the question of, do you want that supplier as a supplier? Right?
Yeah.
Because ultimately it's giving that supplier an opportunity to showcase the fact that, if communicated, you're absolutely right. If you just throw, you know, a bunch of people into Thunderdome, and all of a sudden it's, you know, 2 men enter, 1 man leaves type of a thing. Yeah, okay, I can understand that. But if properly communicated and properly outlined on what this is going to be, and what the strategy and what the flow is going to be, and what information we need from you, I think that applies to RFPs as well. You know what I mean? And yeah. I really like the thought that I don't think that I think this thins the herd a little bit. And maybe if you start with 10 or 12, you're going to get to the 8 that you want, which is the optimum number that you want for auctioning anyway.
But you know, I fully understand the question, because we have seen auctions being misused and auctions not being used correctly, where you just throw it out and there's been no communication to the suppliers. But that's certainly also where we see auctions not succeeding. So you should still be doing all the things that you've always been doing as a buyer. The only thing that is different now is that you are putting power or what is it called? You are putting electricity to the negotiation itself. That's the only thing that really changes. Of course, you also need to be more upfront in terms of your specifications when you go into an auction compared to a face-to-face. But that's really the only difference there. You still need to do your job as a buyer.
All right, I got a couple of questions coming in on the Q&A board, all from Mike, so I'm going to try and get to a couple of them. You could do an effort. I don't know if this is posed as a question, but maybe it is. You could do an effort similar to a mini category strategy to define auction strategy using Porter's 5 forces or other models to define your strategy. I guess that's a statement more than a comment. And honestly, I got to be honest with you, I don't know Porter's 5 forces. I guess I'm going to show my ignorance right here. So Michael, maybe you can brief me on Porter's 5 forces, but I'm assuming that that is probably the case, because if you're smarter than me by throwing that out there, congratulations.
I think there are ways of how you can apply different, you can say, metrics to also identify what would work for auctions and so forth. And I think, you know, applying knowledge to what will define the right strategy for you, that is always the right thing to do. And if we look at best practice companies, and I'm not talking Porter's 5 forces here, but if you look at best practice companies, they never define upfront whether it's an auction or it's a face-to-face negotiation. They have a stop and go gate after the pre-qualification phase, after the RFI, after the RFP, where they have the information about the competitive situation that they're in, where they will then define what is the right strategy. Is that a face-to-face? And if so, what is the strategy there? Or if it's an e-auction, and if so, what is the strategy there? That is what we see, and that is based upon knowledge and making that informed decision on what will bring you the most in your negotiation.
So I know we're bouncing around a little bit based on what I had originally told Heinrich was going to be the flow of the conversation, but I don't want to stop this discussion around the supplier base and communicating properly to the supplier base, which I was going to talk on a little bit later, but I'm happy that we touched on it. I want to go back for a second, hit the rewind button, and it dovetails off of another question that's in here, which is you should build your e-auction approach into your category strategy. Yep. And I think that's absolutely right, Mike. I think that's a great concept to be able to say, okay, as part of our category, in our technology category, we're going to deploy e-auction in these areas of our technology category management, right? And the question, hold on, the question here is, Heinrich, is are there specific categories of spend in certain areas, whether it's supply chain or indirect spend, where auction makes a lot more sense than others?
So, to be honest, I'm from the I'm of the belief that you can use auctions for everything. Should you be using auctions for everything? No, but can you? Absolutely. And it always comes down to, are you able to specify clearly what it is that you are buying and what is the competition in the market? So for me, that should always drive the decision whether you can run an auction or not. But I've seen auctions literally on everything. But because one thing has worked well for one company doesn't mean it works well for the other company. Again, it depends on that specific situation that they're in. But if you bring up slide number 7, Mike, then we can show to the folks here what are the top 10 most e-auction categories or areas that we are seeing from all of our customers and from all the auctions that we see on our system. Yeah. And what are the types of savings that we're also seeing on an average? So this was the top 10 most e-auction categories in 2022. And as you can see, services were by far the top 10, or sorry, by far the most e-auctioned area. And I think one of the reasons for that is that this is something that every company that is using auctions are buying, right? So it's not down to a specific vertical that is buying these types of commodities or services or products. This is something that everybody is buying. But this is what we are seeing as the top 10 most e-auctioned areas. And you can then again also see what are the savings that our users have achieved compared to their current price level. And given that 2022 was a year of prices going up and so forth, then I think a saving of 4.83% really shows the power of what can happen if you put this into an auction. Because auctions has really in the past year been used very much as a cost avoidance tool, and not so much as a savings tool, but really a cost avoidance tool. But there's still a number of categories where you can drive really, really good savings out of this.
Yeah, I got to be honest with you. It's a little shocking to me that services is number one for me, because I would have thought that e-auctioning of services would have been one of the harder categories to deal with because of the nature of it is so, hey, I need this, I need that. It's kind of like
Yes.
like you can't, it's really hard to do a GPO for services, but you can do it for commodities. And I would have thought auctioning of commodities would be easier, but to see services like temporary labor and cleaning and security services, to see that at the top of the list, it is really a little bit shocking to me.
So I agree completely. Though there are some types of services that are extremely difficult, and you should not try to auction, at least not as your first auction, because there's a lot of internal stakeholder preferences. There's a number of ways of how it's difficult for you to define and specify exactly what it is that you are buying, et cetera, et cetera. So I agree completely on that. But then there's also a number of categories where it's very easy for you to specify it, and where there's extremely good competition in the market, and where you can really get a lot of dynamics out of putting that into an auction. Let's just take cleaning as an example, right? Your incumbent supplier have specified 100% what they are cleaning at your place.
Yeah,
so even though you haven't specified that, you can ask your incumbent supplier to give you the specifications on that. And then there's always a very strong competition on cleaning, so you can throw that into an auction very, very easily, and then run that negotiation. But anyway, as I'm saying, I think one of the reasons why services is number one is that we see that being auctioned from every company and customer from our side, where retail is only retail and freight is not applicable to every of our customers either, etc. So I think that's one of the reasons as well. But it is a very strong category, and this has been the number one the number one most e-auction area for not only 2022. This was also in 2021 and also in 2020. I think the turning point was in 2020. Before that, we saw freight as being the most e-auction area, actually.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the audience for a second, because now we've got 20, 25 people in here. I'd like to hear, are there any shockers from the audience? Does anybody in the web chat maybe put in, oh wow, this isn't one I would have thought of? I mean, obviously, I would have thought freight and transportation with last year, with the decline of freight and transportation, which was in basically a tailspin, would have been like at the top of, oh my God, the market's moving so fast. I have no idea where the market's at on any given day. And because of that, that's going to be at the top of my list. Like, I would have assumed that would have been on a global scale, that would have been somewhere towards the top.
But you also had a freight market at certain periods of last year where you just if you were able to get it shipped, you would just buy it. You didn't have the competition to actually take it to an e-auction. So it's really also depending on the market situation. Freight normally would be in top 3.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, we're still dealing with the fallout and the ramifications of COVID, and the fact that you're absolutely right. I mean, there was a point in time where I think the freight companies were actually auctioning off space, and they're like, "Hey, I've got one container that I can put on a ship that might get to LA before the end of the year, right?"
Yeah.
So go ahead.
But if you look at freight, right, that's for me, that's a very interesting e-auction category, because that's where you can also dip into the spot market, right? We saw that for air freight, for an example, where we have a lot of customers that have identified, you know, a group of, you know, seven, eight suppliers. And then whenever they need to have something shipped by air freight, they will invite all of these, you know, seven, eight carriers in. And if some of them have a free space on an airplane that is leaving tomorrow, they were willing to really lower the price significantly to fill that space up. So that's where you really dip into the spot market there. And we see that on a number of different categories where this is extremely interesting and where you really drive additional value out of the e-auctions, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I saw that when I was in the seafood business, we'd export fish, you know, fresh fish overseas overnight. And I'd get freight. It wasn't an auction, but, and I think I told you this, it was freight forwarders calling me saying, hey, if you want to send another LD3 over to Busan tonight, I can get it there for, you know, 35 cents on the dollar of what your other LD3 costs. LD3, by the way, is a box that goes underneath the seats on a plane, just so you know, and it's full of, you know, fish and clothes and whatever the heck it is. I want to just highlight one thing here. That slide, and I'm going to bring it back up one more time. That slide highlights something called the Global eAuction Index, which is something that you at Scanmarket put out, right?
Yes.
I highlighted it on LinkedIn earlier this week. I hopefully got a bunch of downloads. I'm going to highlight it again because I think the content is absolutely amazing. Can you tell me a little bit, just really quickly, about the eAuction Index and what you do at Scanmarket with that, so that everybody's aware of that?
Absolutely. So we issue the index every quarter. So you can every quarter follow what are the top 10 most e-auction areas, what are the savings that we're seeing. And then we do an annual report, which is the one that you were referring to on the slide there, where we really dig much deeper into the statistics that we have seen in that year in terms of geography, in terms of e-auction usage, on auction types, in terms of volumes, spend, categories, etc., etc. So it's really an exciting, if you are a little bit interested in e-auctions, you should read this every single year, and you just update yourself on what we are seeing and what is actually best practice in a number of other companies. And to my knowledge, we are the only one that is actually publishing information like this out there. And this is really based upon a very large data set. So it's really robust statistics that we are providing there. And I'm a big statistic fan, because, you know, what can you learn from looking into statistics? How can you use that to predict or to optimize what you're doing? As I said before, you know, what is the value if I add in one more additional supplier? What is the value of that? What is the best auction type from a statistical point of view in regards to how many suppliers I have? What is the best day of the week for me to e-auction, or even what is the best day during the day or time or during the day to e-auction? Can I statistically drive something from that? And absolutely, yes, you can. So from a statistical point of view, and this is just a little fun fact, right? We can see from a statistical point of view that the best month during the year to e-auction is in June, and the best day is a Thursday. So if you want to optimize your chances of statistically getting the high savings, you should do all of your negotiations on a Thursday in June. And it's just fun. It's just fun facts like that, or things like that can drive your strategy and how you are choosing to apply. Because what we can also see is that the worst day during the week to run an e-auction is a Friday, and we actually see a lot of buyers conducting negotiations on a Friday, because then they can end off the week. But that's actually statistically not where you get the high savings. So using that to make informed decisions, I think, is super interesting.
All right, everybody who's in this room right now, I'm going to go charge $5,000 a piece for a ticket for that one sentence. That one sentence should save you enough money to pay us $5,000 per head, just for that one nugget of information. I'm going to tell you right now, after this event, I'm going to get back on LinkedIn, and I'm going to put Thursdays in June, hashtag best day to auction, to run auctions, because that's the type of stuff that it's pure gold, right? It's absolute pure gold. It's like, okay, I mean, listen, I'm thinking about selling my house right now in the United States, in Massachusetts, right? If you could tell me hey, listen, the best days and the best month to auction off your house, essentially, because that's what's happening in the real estate market right now, would be these days. You know, why wouldn't you do that? I mean, that's like, hey, you know what? Don't go to Bali in December. It's the rainy season. The best time to go is September, right? These are the types of golden nuggets and the reasons why I do these webinars. So thank you for dropping that. That is a
You're
complete
welcome,
gold
mate.
nugget bombshell. All right, I want to go back. I'm going to rewind for a second. I want to go back because we talked about it a little bit, but I want to make sure everybody understands because we kind of went out of sequence. I want to talk a little bit about the different types of auctions that there are, if it's okay with you. And then I want to get into results because we only have 15. I told you this was going to happen. We're at 45 minutes. We have 15 minutes left. People are starting to wake up and starting to ask questions, which I love. But I want to make sure everybody understands the different types of auctions. And I also want to make sure that I understand that you as a company help guide people through this process, right? It's not like, hey, listen, here's the thing, see you later, right? You guys help people with this because I can't imagine there's got to be some training wheels to this whole thing.
Yes, absolutely. So, you know, of course we provide the software, but we also provide the enablement of people to understand how to use this, what is actually best practice. And we do actually a lot of different types of training on this where we don't even look at the software, but where we just talk about strategy. So we do a lot of that, but you know, different auction types. So I've already explained the reverse auction, right? So suppliers bidding against each other, lowering the price. Then, you know, typically all other auction types that you would talk into would then be a Japanese auction. Japanese auction works this way that you start the auction at, let's say, you start the auction at, let's say, $100. You define a time interval, let's say 30 seconds, and a price decrement of, let's say, $1. So every 30 seconds, the price will go $1 down, so 100 to 99 to 98 to 97, et cetera, et cetera. And for each price step, your supplier will have to say yes or no. Am I in or am I out? But the only thing that the supplier is able to see is the clock ticking down and the price going down. So they have no idea how many other competitors how many other competitors they are up against, whether they are the only one left in the auction. They just have to look at, am I willing to give you this price point or not? Yeah. And there's a lot of ways of how to utilize that and how to utilize that from a strategical point of view, which I don't think we have time to talk into today, but it's really an interesting auction type for especially for categories or products where it's difficult for you to compare the offerings directly from the different suppliers. But we'll leave that to another discussion. Then you have Dutch auctions, which is the third most, you can say, a used auction type. If we talk about, you know, auctions where you are looking to, you know, get the prices down. So a Dutch auction is similar to a Japanese auction, but here you start at the bottom and make your way up. So you start at, let's say, €50, time interval 30 seconds, price increment, let's say $5, right? So you go from 50 to 55, 60, 65, etc. And the first time one of the suppliers will accept the price level and submits the order or submits the price, the auction closes. So now it's a question for your supplier: how much ice does he have in his stomach? Does he dare wait 30 seconds to get a price, but at the same time also risk losing the entire order if another supplier goes in before him? And again, the only thing that the supplier is able to see is the clock ticking down and the price going up. So again, it's a very psychological game for the supplier to be in there, because it all comes down to what is his or her knowledge of the competitive market and the situation that they are actually in. And that is why you can actually run very successful Dutch and Japanese auctions with only one participating supplier. The question is always, what does that supplier know? If he knows he's the only one, you gain nothing out of that. But if he believes that he's up against others, then you have a very strong auction type. Yeah, we actually, that's what we did in the seafood business. We ran a Dutch auction with the buyers and sellers. And of course, Dutch auction comes from the Dutch flower markets, because that's how they're selling off. They are selling off flowers. And then, of course, you have forward auctions or sales auctions, and that's where you're selling off commodities, scrap or whatever that you are then, you know, selling to different buyers, and of course prices are then going up. But it could also be a buying auction where you are running it on a discount. So the higher discount you are, and there of course the discount will always go up. So So those are overall the different types of auctions. Then you have a variety of different sub-auctions, and then you have a number of functionalities that you can enable in these different auction types, depending on that precise competitive situation that you're in. But these are the auction types that I think the audience, that's what you need to know, really.
Yep. Cool. Thank you so much. Great question. While I have you, time check, we've got about 12 minutes left. I want to go back and I want to talk about success stories and about what you've seen and what you've heard. I also want to ask you about some of the craziest things you've seen auctioned, if you can, and then we'll come back and we'll tie it all up. But before we do that, one of the questions again is, to what extent are you starting to embed Visa artificial intelligence, these statistical truths like, hey, June Thursdays, hey, 7 versus 11. How much of this are you starting to embed in the statistical truths to enable your customers?
Yeah, exactly. So at the moment, we are doing a lot to to make them aware of this and communicate all of this in. But what we're building in, or trying to build in the background, is an AI that will basically automatically advise customers on the right strategy compared to that situation that they're in. We're still there's still a work in progress, and it's something that we are training people on, but we also looking in how we can put some power to that. But that's still a little bit way off. But the system can, you can provide recommendations. So we already have in the system, once you have run an RFP, the system actually gives you recommendations as to the competitive level on all of the different product lines. So you can very quickly get an overview of where you have good competition and where you can bring that into an auction. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot there that would be very interesting in the coming years to build out an AI around, so you can really automate that.
So we've been talking about a lot of stuff. I want to make sure I cover this. You've got a great slide here that shows kind of how e-auction and automated negotiations helps enhance procurement, and there's a ton of stuff here, right? Obviously, there's a lot of different ways in which this deploying this and what we've been talking about all day helps the performance of your procurement organization. And when you look at it on a screen like this, it's kind of like, wow, that gives me a full scope of and breadth of
so this is of course what we are talking into when we're talking source to contract, and where we can support our customers with features and with different functionalities, right? So again, it comes down to what is their pain point, what is their objective, and where do they actually need help, right?
Right. So exactly. I want to jump ahead one more and talk a little bit about success stories, what those look like. I know you talked to me a little bit about the percentage of savings and things like that. I want to talk a little bit about, tell me some of the successes that you've had and your clients have had as far as deploying this, what it does from a supplier relationship. Does it help build the relationship with stakeholders? Like, hey, the office of the CIO now believes in us even more because of this. And just give me kind of a sense of the success that comes with this.
So I think, I had to think last night about, I've been doing this for 17 years, and what stands out in my memory as great auction cases or experiences where it's been utilized in a really cool way. Mm-hmm. We did a freight forwarding. We had a freight forwarding case a number of years ago where basically all of the suppliers said it's not possible to do an auction on this. No way that you can actually do that. But so what we actually did was we invited the suppliers in on the Tuesday. We had them coming in Tuesday and Wednesday. So we invited them in on a Tuesday and had individual meetings with them, explaining we are running this as an auction, but we want to make sure, and this is why you are here, that we do this in the most correct way, and in a way that is transparent and fair for everybody, and we make sure that we actually incorporate everything into the auction as needed to make sure that we are running this on total cost of ownership. So they all gave us feedback to that, and they were all told to have a think about this, and then they would all come in the next day and then be sitting around a table, all of the suppliers, so they actually knew who the other competitors were, and then they were going to present to us how we could do this in the most transparent and fair way. And based upon that, we would then set up an auction for them that they would sign off on and say, yeah, you have captured it all. And then we actually ran the auction a couple of weeks later. And we got, even from the suppliers that lost in that exercise, actually came back and said, we don't like auctions, but if we're going to run an auction, this is the way to do it, because they all had a say in how to do this exactly. And the savings were tremendous. They had 50% savings, the customer that were running this auction, because it has always been a too complex auction for them to actually go into. But because we involved the suppliers and they all agreed, yes, if you're running an auction, this is how you should then do it. That's when they were able to really get the competition going. So for me, that was a brilliant way of using that while you are still, really communicating and working together with the suppliers here.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, if you think about some of the RFPs that you've run over the years, that are the most successful RFPs, it's the ones in which you bring the suppliers all together. I mean, I've done that before. I brought all the suppliers into the room and said, listen, we're going to run an RFP process and this is how we're going to do it. Yeah. How does everybody feel about that? And then you get the feedback and it's like, okay, this all works. And it's almost like, okay, listen, we're all equally, there's no advantage or disadvantage here because we all have the same information, right? Yeah. So that kind of makes sense to me and rings true that would be.
But for me, that was just that was also just a fun case to be with, because it was super challenging, and we found a way that everybody agreed upon, and then we had amazing result out of it. So it was just one of the ones that is sticking out in my memory. But there's been hundreds of auctions that has been super interesting, and I would say whenever you run an auction and you end up in a situation where the suppliers are very much agreeing to what is the right price, and you typically have 2-3 suppliers that is fighting in the end, that's always a good auction, because then you know that you have achieved the right right market price. And so for me, all of those auctions are always awesome.
Yeah. Question, and we got a couple more questions and I'm going to wrap up. So one of the questions is, do you recommend test auction to avoid supplier panic?
Absolutely. 100%. One of the most important success factors for an e-auction is the preparation of the suppliers and the conditioning of suppliers. And if they haven't participated in auctions before, then you can just make a quick copy of the live auction, put in some dummy data, invite them in for that 2 days before the real auction. They can play around in there. If they have questions in our system, they can just do a quick call and we can answer those. But then they know how it works, and then you have removed all questions except what is the right price.
Yeah, and that was the question, was if they're not familiar with auction platforms, if this is their first experience at an auction, can you create a test environment for them and even simulate other bidders that they'll be competing against? Yeah. And I think that's great. You kind of have to show people the UI, because the one thing I think you don't want to do, to answer this question, in my opinion, is you don't want to throw somebody into a brand new environment, especially when there's the pressures of things like Japanese and reverse and Dutch. It's like people are triggered. They're stressed out enough not knowing when to press the button. Never mind, oh my God, I bought it. Like, I've seen people press buttons by mistake and then call me and go, I didn't mean to buy that 50,000 pounds of scallops. Can we please put it back? Right. So, I've seen that, and I think test auctions is a great thing.
But that's all a part of the preparation and the conditioning, right? But so when we do supplier training, we typically spend 20 to 30 minutes per supplier on supplier training. Half of it is on, you can say, how to participate, and the other half is conditioning. But that's typically what we do in terms of best practice in terms of supplier training.
Somebody wants to know how they find out more information about you on LinkedIn or where to meet you. So
they can just look me up, and if they have questions, they're more than happy to reach out to me. I always love a good discussion on auctions, so they're more than welcome.
Yeah, I've posted no less than 3 times in the last 2 days on this topic with Henrik's direct connection. So if you want to talk to him more about this, I have a funny feeling that he's more than happy to chat about this for hours on end. Okay,
absolutely. I'm sorry about that.
Believe it or not, we're at 60 minutes. I'm always shocked that we can get there, but I feel like we could do another hour on this. So just to wrap up the whole day, if there's one thing that people need to take away from the last 60 minutes that we just talked about, what do you think it would be for you?
Well, I think it is that you can e-auction, in my opinion, everything. You don't limit yourself but use it wisely. So you shouldn't e-auction everything either, but you should use it where you have the competition in the market and where you are able to specify that in all those situations, or specify what you are looking to buy. In those situations, you should always have auction as a possibility. Yeah. And something that you should consider. And then, you know, so I'm a big fan of making informed decisions on what can give you the best value for money, what is the best negotiation strategy for you, rather than people just saying, oh, that doesn't work, or I always do face-to-face, or I always do an auction on that. No, well, let's see what competitive situation that you're in. So for me, that is the takeaway. You know, use it to make informed decisions, and use that to really drive your negotiation and get the best market price available for you.
All right,
I don't know if that makes sense, but
no, I love it. I love it, and thank you for that. This is the stuff I'm going to throw out there. Number one, Thursdays in June is the best day to run auctions. I think that's fantastic. Number two, this doesn't kill the RFP process. It actually enhances the RFP process in most cases. Number three, you need to know what you're buying, what the market is, and supplier communication is vital to success. That's kind of what I heard today. So, so thank you for all of those nuggets. I think it's absolutely amazing. Thanks again to Scanmarket for your continued support of Procurement Foundry. We really appreciate your partnership in this space. As you can tell, I'm super excited about this topic, and I was so glad to have you here to talk about it. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for the collaboration and the communication today amongst the folks that were here. And I think that if you haven't picked up the eAuction index information from them yet, by all means, go find that and download it. I hyperlink it on LinkedIn as well. Go read that. It's going to make you smart in your next Chief Procurement Officer meeting. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Heinrich. And it was great to meet you and talk auctions.
You too, Mike.
I can't wait to see you soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Cheers. Thank you, Mike.
All right, buddy. Cheers. Bye-bye, everybody. Have a great day.
Too.